Well, good morning, everybody. To those of you who are here on the session live and those who will be viewing the recording. So I appreciate you taking the time out to join us for this morning. I'm going to stop my share here just so you can see me here. So again, thanks for coming out to today's session. We are doing this on a Zoom webinar, so you won't be seeing yourselves. You'll just be seeing our me, unfortunately, and our presenter. So we'll get underway in just a sec here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Corey Reddekopp. I am the Director of Policy and Stakeholder Relations with the Burnaby Board of Trade. We are the Chamber of Commerce for Burnaby and the Economic Development Partner for the city. And really our role is that as the catalyst for economic growth, the convener of our business community and champion for their interests. And we've been doing a ton of work over COVID-19 to make sure that our business community is as supported as it can be with the information it needs to be successful and resilient through this. And today's session is one more step along that journey. First, like we do with all of our events, I would like to recognize that we are on right now, the Board of Trade operates on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. And I do want to make a quick mention and thank you to our annual partners, who are the organizations who really step up throughout the year to support the mission of the Board of Trade. And our platinum partners are the BCIT School of Business and Media and the Burnaby Now. Our gold partners are SFU, Fortis BC, Pacific Blue Cross, Electronic Arts Canada, Douglas College, and ABC Recycling. And our silver partners are the Port of Vancouver, Trans Mountain, Scotiabank, Appia Development, and Alexander College. And some great corporate citizens, huge employers here in the city of Burnaby, and great members of the Board of Trade. Speaking of another great member of the Board of Trade, we're really happy to have Taz here with Bromwich and Smith to talk a little bit about our session today. I'll introduce Taz here. I'm going to start, I think I turned your video off here, Taz. I'm going to turn your video on so you can join the conversation here, and we'll get underway here. So Taz has been in the finance industry for 18 years and has her adult educator certificate. Taz is passionate about simplifying complex financial concepts for Canadians and about getting tough conversations started in order to find the right solutions to move on and to move up. Taz is the community engagement partner at Bromwich and Smith, licensed insolvency trustees, as I mentioned, and she's been featured on Global TV, AM 770, and we're really happy to have her here today to share some of her thoughts on today's topic around how to prepare your business to weather the storm that we're going through now in uncertain times, and what options exist for you should that preparation not be enough, and what are some options that you might want to consider or at least know what are out there for managing your business going forward. These are really unprecedented times, unprecedented challenges. I know a lot of businesses have struggled and are struggling. So there's a ton of resources that we have put together at our website, bbot.ca/COVID-19. But this is an important session, an important conversation to have around what other options might be out there should you need to avail yourselves of those. So enough about hearing from me. I'm going to pass the floor over to my friend Taz, and she'll get underway here. So Taz, the floor is yours, and I'm going to unspotlight myself, spotlight you where the spotlight really deserves to be, and I will let it over to you. Go ahead.
I'm sure I speak for the entire membership that we'd love to hear from you, Corey. So thanks so much for having me today, the Burnaby Board of Trade. Thanks for everyone that's here today. I know this can be, a bit of an icky topic, but as we talk about these icky topics, we learn, we grow, and then actually, hopefully we can get to a really good place and then share this with other people. So I'm hoping that I can bring some hope to everyone today. So thanks so much for joining me. We can get started right away here. Obviously, our topic today is, how to set your business up for financial success, and really looking at, can you weather the storm? Can your business weather the storm? Do you need to pivot? Or what does it look like if those really aren't your options? So we'll just bring up the agenda today. Is your business able to weather the storm? So we're going to look at, what does it mean for a business to be able to weather the storm? Then we're going to look at, does your business need to pivot? And if it does need to pivot, again, what does that look like? What are some action steps you can take to pivot your business? And then finally, if we can't weather the storm, we can't pivot, well, then what? What exactly is the plan? And one of the things we're going to look at, one of the options that would be available, of course, is restructuring. So what does that mean? What does it look like? what happens to your business assets and your personal assets? And then I'm going to share a few more resources with you. Of course, the BBOT has tons of great resources. I'm going to share just a few more with you. And then we're going to open it up to some Q&A. So we can move on to the next one, please. Awesome. So we're going to start with our first polling question, which is, what is your overall feeling as a business owner given the current pandemic? So we're going to bring up the polling question and just fairly simple, just go in and pick one of the answers there. So you've got the choice of, I'm feeling okay, my business levels haven't really changed much, or you've got, well, a little worried, but I hope to recover in the coming months. You've got, I'm extremely worried, recovery seems daunting, or I will be or have been forced to maybe close my doors. So we've got a couple seconds here for everyone to just answer this first poll question. It'll be interesting to see, what the percentages are. Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and I think it's a really good question to just sort of have an idea, like a bit of a baseline of where we all are today. Anyone that's participating, if you're watching this later, I encourage you to, kind of do this poll for yourself and see where you're at. And then, as I say, through this presentation, we'll go through and look at a couple of different things depending on where we're at. So let's have a look at our results. So 67% are at a little worried, I hope to recover in the coming months. And then 33% are at, I'm feeling okay, my business levels haven't changed much. So this is really great. So, majority are a little bit worried and hopeful, which is wonderful to hear. And then we've got a few that are really kind of like status quo. They're really weathering this storm. So that's really wonderful. Let's move on to the next slide then. So setting up your business for success. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I've just lost the screen. Okay, here we are. Okay, so sorry, COVID, the COVID recession phases, we can kind of look at that similar to, the phases of grief. And I totally stole this from Whitehorn Financing, so I'm definitely giving them credit here. But, if you think back to mid-March, right? Most non-essential businesses were being shut down. Employees were starting to work from home. In some cases, if the business was shutting down, employees were being maybe laid off or something along those lines. Government stepped in and rolled out different supports and different plans for individuals as well as businesses. I would say in March, it was a little bit more focused towards individuals than it was for businesses. Banks began, principal deferrals, line of credit, margin increases. And there were businesses that were already in trouble pre-COVID, and that kind of became, it just kind of went under greater scrutiny. I think if your business was sort of just, barely holding on once the pandemic hit, it was, we had no choice. We had to face it. We had to really look at it, right? Then there's phase two, and some of us might still be in that panic phase. Some of us might be here too. I think you can sometimes kind of move, forward and backwards between these, just like you do with grief, right? So in phase two, it's assessment, it's near-term planning, looking at additional supports. What else is the government rolling out at this point? What are lenders doing? What are our supply chains doing? What's the additional support? And I think here we started to see a little bit more of a robust plan for small businesses, definitely for big businesses, and then for individuals as well. And then we're sort of, I feel like many of us are kind of moving towards that phase three, but phase three is a very slow recovery. We're going to see like a W or like sort of a, an ebb and flow with the recovery phase. So, I guess I'm sharing this to just normalize the fact, whatever you are feeling right now, it is totally normal. It's just like grief. You may go through various, different emotions at different times, regardless of what phase you're in. And just to sort of normalize that, and let's kind of get that baseline. Next slide, please. Okay, so we really want to look at, can your business weather the storm? And let's have a look at what exactly does that mean? So, as far as weathering the storm goes, we want to get a bit of a baseline, first and foremost. So, how has the pandemic and social distancing, affected first of all, how is it affecting, your clients? How are they feeling? What is their recovery plan? Your clients, your customers, whoever you're serving, what is their recovery plan, and how is this impacting your clients, right? Are your clients back to work? What is happening with your supply chain? Where is that at? What about your lenders or investors? Are they moving forward? How is that looking for you? And we want to look at, do you have cash injections that you might need or want moving forward? Lenders are they're not really lending new money so much for like new customers. If you're an existing business client, and of course there are lots of different programs out there, but really there's a little bit of that tightening up of lenders. So, where do you sit in terms of, the cash flow and the money side of things on that? Can you take some input on from your holders, and what does that look like? And what if it's a longer recovery period than we're maybe thinking? And again, we talked earlier about there being this ebb and flow between the different phases. So, there could be this sense of recovery and then sort of another dip. So what are some action steps that you can take right now to ensure that your business can actually weather the storm? Okay. So one is, look at, can you go online or virtual, or can you expand or grow your social media presence? If you're looking at that side of things, the key really is to show that you care versus being really salesy. If you're going to go to the online platforms, you're going to go to a virtual, it's really important that you show that you care for your employees, you care for your clients, whoever it is that you're serving. This is a real time to share in that kind of this common experience and that empathy, and just being in a place of how do we serve, how do we help? And then really understanding and taking advantage of all the government and lender programs that you qualify for. And I really feel that the Board of Trade is a great resource to just kind of help you muddle through that. And then finally, liquidity is going to be essential for you to be able to weather the storm. So we can move to the next slide. So, business pivoting here. Can you be flexible? If so, what does that look like? Do you continue to offer the same products and services, or do you need to get creative? So if you think about, Canadian distilleries got a little bit creative, and rather than only producing alcohol, they decided to make alcohol-based hand sanitizer, which there was a great demand for. So that's an example of a pivot. Another example is, a lot of the garment businesses in Canada, again, did a pivot and started making different types of face masks, and some were really, really creative. But again, that's an example of a pivot. So if your business is going to need to pivot, or you're looking at pivoting, what do you need in order to pivot your business? Are there, is there a technical side of things, a technical purchase or upgrade that needs to be done? There may need to be changes in location, or how the delivery takes place, and there will be some costs associated with that. So these are some things that you really want to think about if you're thinking that your business can or should pivot. You also want to look at, what is your ask? What is your ask of, say, your clients or employees, and of the government or of lenders? And you want to be really clear and concise and propose a solution for yourself and for your business, but also be looking at your stakeholders and clients. So it's a really multifaceted way of looking at, how do you pivot? Can you pivot? Who is all at the table of this pivot? And how do we sort of appease everyone, or do our best to do that? It's a real time to get creative as well. Out of every adversity, we were talking about that earlier, come opportunities. And so what are the opportunities in your field, or maybe just outside of your field, that you can pivot into? Can you streamline your offerings? If you look at restaurants, they've streamlined their menus, right? So is that an option for you? Can you streamline your offerings? Can you give some sort of a free trial? If you look at like Audible or Spotify, they were able to, have these free trials for 30 days or 60 days because they understood that people are facing sort of, this lockdown boredom, right? So these are some things that you can look at. So some key things really to keep in mind if you feel that your business can or wants to pivot are, number one, the pivot should still align with your business's core values and long-term trends. Number two, you want your pivot to be an extension of your current services or offerings, and overall function of your business. And then finally, you want to offer a sustainable path to profitability, right? At the end of the day, that's really going to be critical. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, so it's our next polling question, which is, has your business been forced to pivot? I think it'll be really interesting to see, based on our first set of questions, there's actually 33% that were sort of like, we're good, our business is good. But there were 67% that, were, okay, it's a little bit of a challenge, but I have hope. So really interested to see, has your business already been forced to pivot? It's just a quick yes or no answer. You can go ahead and fill that out and we'll have a look at what the results are. I always say, I really do believe that entrepreneurs are some of the most resilient and most resourceful people in our country. So I'm going to guess that we're going to get a majority of yeses, but we'll see what the poll results actually come in as. All right, here we go, the results. Wow, 100% have said no, your business has not been forced to pivot. I am so curious, maybe during the Q&A, I'd love to hear from some of the business owners, have you just been able to weather the storm or have you been forced to shut down? I'm hoping it's the first one, but let's have a look at sort of moving forward now. If you're not weathering the storm and you're not pivoting, then we might have to look at something a little bit different. So we can move to the next slide now. And sorry, every so often I lose visibility. Here we go. Okay, great. So I love this quote, failure is an opportunity to begin again. And I would say, also there's fail again, fail better. So as business owners, and as people, we really want to look to be better today than we were yesterday. And, I challenge you in terms of your interpretation and your belief of failure. Failure really can be seen as, the end all and something really terrible, or especially for business owners, I think failure can really be seen as a step ladder to success. I think, I'm not going to quote it exactly correctly, but I'm pretty sure Edison had said, that he had found 10,000 ways that, that didn't work, for electricity. And then that led him to create what he did. So, I hope as business owners, we can take failure with a bit of a grain of salt and look at it really as an opportunity. So we can move to the next slide to have a look at, if your business is not weathering the storm or pivoting, well, then what? And so the first thing I want to look at is promises, right? We all make, in our personal lives, we make promises based on certain predictions. So I, pre-pandemic, let's say, made plans to, visit, see a friend for lunch at 12 o'clock noon. I'm heading out the door. It's, 11:30 and something happens to my child and I've got to take care of that. And so now it's maybe 10 to 12 and I've got to, let my friend know I'm running late or I might not be able to make it. There was a promise that I was going to meet my friend for lunch. It was based on this prediction that everything was going to go great, but something changed, right? So the promise was made on a certain predication, but all of the elements of that have now changed. And we know as friends, we would obviously forgive our friend and reschedule and work that out. We don't necessarily think in the same terms as small business owners when it comes to our money and our finances, but that's exactly what is happening when you're in a contract, with your creditors. It was a promise that was predicated on things being kind of even keel, pretty normal. Nobody really predicted this pandemic. We certainly didn't predict it to this extent. So I think that might be a little bit, of an easier way to talk about it versus kind of talk about cash flow projections and, a rolling forecast and that kind of thing. So sometimes when we're in our place of suffering, we can only focus on ourselves and, we're not able to see the suffering of others. And so in this time, it's really important to look at empathy for ourselves. Just like I said, if you couldn't make a lunch date, it wouldn't be the end of the world. You wouldn't beat yourself up. You'd be like, I really had every intention to be there, and then this happened, and you would reschedule. So, you want to have some empathy with yourself, but you also want to have empathy with your staff, any of your business partners, any of your vendors, that kind of thing. So let's look at, if you look at the bottom of the screen, what is the meaning of insolvent? And really interestingly, there are two definitions of insolvent. And one is having ceased paying or unable to pay our debts as they become due in the usual course of business, which that's one definition. And then the second is having liabilities in excess of a reasonable market value of assets held. And so, in terms of being insolvent, in terms of your small business, you could be one or the other, or really both. And what's interesting is that the Insolvency Act is a legal statute, but it's also a business. So, a trustee can be brought in by you, the business owner, or they can be brought in by the lenders. And I don't know about you, but if someone's coming over to my house, I want to be able to plan it and invite them and have them come home to, a lovely cooked meal and, my house nice and clean, versus have someone just invite themselves over. And so, again, just kind of looking at this idea of forgiveness and empathy with ourselves, and understanding that there is, in Canada, there's a legal statute to help individuals and business owners to get out from that crushing, overwhelming feeling of debt. So we can move to the next slide, please. So let's have a look at the nature of your relationship with your bank. Banks have been super, super flexible, and they will continue to be flexible as long as it makes sense. The bank also answers to their stakeholders. And so, if you think about you as a business owner, the bank is a business owner, it's a lot easier to make an unhappy customer happy than to go out and find a new customer. So you as the small business owner, or as the individual, may be feeling, to yourself, if you're struggling with, the lending situation that you have with your bank, that they're not going to be happy with me when I'm not making my payments. This conversation is not going to go well. I don't want to have the conversation. But again, you are the bank's customer too. Nobody wants to not honor their commitments, and the bank understands that. And I think the banks really, at this point for sure, are really coming to the table and, doing their best to work through. There will be a point at which, the banks are just not able to be flexible, and this is where you need to know what your other options are. So again, when we've made that promise, it was based on certain predictions, not having any idea what COVID would look like, and all of that has changed. And I just wanted to quickly share with you that the principles of the Insolvency Act, there are 4 key principles. Number 1 is rehabilitation. So if you kind of think about, the game Monopoly, when you went bankrupt, it was game over. That's it, you were out of the game. You don't get to play, you don't get to be part of that anymore. Well, it's not like that in real life. In real life, it's about rehabilitation and making sure that, you as an individual or a business owner are still part of the community. Number 2 is the control and distribution of assets for equitable distribution. And we'll talk about that a little bit. I won't be able to get into it in too much depth. Number 3 is investigation. The licensed insolvency trustee has an obligation to do some investigating. And then number 4 is the most important. It is restoring that faith in the overall system. We are a credit-based society. We need credit, and in order to be able to need and have credit, we need to have an exit strategy so that there's faith in the system. So that's all I'm going to say about that. We can move on to the next screen, which is our last polling question for today. So we can bring up the polling question. This one's a little bit of a quiz. This is a test your knowledge. As an incorporated business, my personal finances are not attached to my business. Do you feel that this is true or false? I'm not going to say any commentary because this is kind of a skill testing question. Okay, let's see if the poll results are ready. As an incorporated business, my personal finances are not attached to my business, true or false. Majority are saying true, and there's just a minority that feel false. And honestly, it's a little bit of a trick question. So we're going to get into that in a little more detail here. We can move on to the next slide. So of course, a business is a thing, but a business is also an activity. So we can kind of say it's like a verb and a noun, right? As a corporate entity, you are personally not liable except for certain things like environmental issues, or if you're the director, you know, then source deductions, GSTs, these things will be considered deemed trust and will fall on the shoulders of the director. If you've personally guaranteed or co-signed for your business loans, you are personally responsible. So even if the business declares bankruptcy, you may personally still be on the hook. Now, there are ways to write those terms into a proposal, and a proposal is a really, really great alternative to a bankruptcy. So, you know, we want to look at it as what's in it for your lenders, your creditors. What are they getting out of your restructuring? What is your ask? And how do we move forward? And that's a really big one. I really want you to take away from here that, you know, if you're in this position where your business is going to need to restructure, I want you to take away the idea of hope and the fact that there's definitely life after restructuring. So most likely, as a small business, although you went to the bank for help with starting up your business, or, you know, a business loan for capital expenditures or whatever that is, it is extremely likely that the loan is in your name as well. So if your business restructures, you are personally still responsible. Again, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of different things that can happen. You know, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to restructure because I'm the director of a company, and I would never be able to be the director of a company. And again, there's a difference between consumer proposal and bankruptcy. And consumer proposal, you know, allows you to be a director. You know, in a small business situation where it's your business and yourself liable, you know, or responsible, you are still going to be able to conduct business. You are still going to be able to live. You're not necessarily going to lose every single asset. We're going to look into that in a little bit more detail. The other thing I just want to say is, if you're in this place where you are overwhelmed, you're not able to pivot or weather the storm, you're going to look at restructuring. It's really critical to focus on self-care, mental health, and looking at your future self, you know, for yourself, your team, and your business. So we can go to the next slide. So some power questions. You know, the future is critical. We tend to focus on the past so much. You know, old systems and ways of doing things may not actually be ideal for the future. So it's really better to under promise, over deliver. It's so important to design your business for the future, and something that we can actually deliver on. So here are some questions that you kind of want to be looking at. You know, do your staff want to come back to work? How will that new normal look? Are you being pulled along by the current of the economy, or does your business really know how to swim, right? It's really easy for any business to sort of be successful in times of boom. But when the economy, when that current changes, is your business able to actually swim against that current? Can you serve others and provide your services regardless? And you know, if in this moment, no, and you've got to restructure, then as you set up that new business, these are some things that you really want to consider. Now, a corporate entity can be shut down. Then most often, there's a personal responsibility. So you may also need to restructure personally. But you can open another business under a new name or as a sole proprietor. And then again, we talked about the idea of being a director, not being a director. A lot of people say, I can't declare bankruptcy because I'm the director, but you can restructure under a consumer proposal and not affect your directorship at all. There are also so many exemptions. So quite often when we are feeling like we're drowning, our first instinct is to liquidate our assets. And I want to caution you not to do that without having a consultation first. So just a simple example, there's something called the tools of the trade that most businesses will have some sort of a tool of the trade. You're a painter, you're going to have, you know, all your different painting brushes and, you know, overalls and maybe steel toe boots and things like that. There is an exemption for tools of the trade. There are other exemptions as well. So before you go liquidating assets or believing this myth that you're going to have no assets left if you restructure, I want you to make sure you have a really good consultation. We can move to the next slide, please. So just like mental health, if you think about mental health 20 years ago, we didn't really talk about it. We just sort of thought people were lazy or crazy. And I mean, even when I say that out loud, I feel like, whoa, don't say that. But that is where we were 20 years ago. We didn't talk about it, and we had some real judgments around it. And I feel like we're in the same place right now with debt, except I think that the playing field has gotten leveled out a little bit with this pandemic. So, people will also make judgments around debt and financial situation that people are lazy, they should have done better. Well, you know what? You are where you are, and you must have empathy for yourself and look towards the future and how do you move forward. There are experts in the community to help with debt and restructuring and moving on. Just like during this pandemic, we've turned to the experts who are, the health ministers of, of the country and of the provinces. It's the same sort of thing. We want to look to the experts in the field when it comes to debt. So what does that look like? Number one, you want to make an inventory, which can be really tough because we often don't want to look at what our situation is, but the sooner that we can look at it and make an inventory of where we are, the easier it's going to be to slay that dragon. So you want to lean in, turn towards the experts and the specialists, and really get an idea of what's the current situation. Number two, you really want to look at what are my future prospects? Are there exemptions, that the creditors cannot have access to regardless of what I do? We don't want to be trading our future retirement for some of our past, failures. Again, I'm saying that with love. We don't recommend that, and neither does the legislation. So again, before you liquidate anything, have a look to see, take an inventory, and then what are my future prospects? And then really the key is to take action. There is a solution, there is hope for rebuilding. So it's really a question of what are the action steps that you need to take. And again, keeping in mind that social distancing is still really, really critical. So you do not need to meet in person with an expert. We offer phone and video and webinar options so that you can still stay safe and healthy, but take care of your, get your financial house in order. We'll move to the next slide. Just really quickly want to give you a bit of an overview of the difference between a bankruptcy and a consumer proposal, because consumer proposals are not really talked about very much. So a bankruptcy, of course, a trustee will be the first to say it is the last resort. It does provide legally binding protection from your creditors, so that once you sign in, your creditors cannot contact you, serve you with a court order or any of that kind of thing. In a bankruptcy, your assets vest with a trustee. So I'll go back and forth between the two. In a consumer proposal, it is a negotiated settlement and you have the same legally binding protection from your creditors. In a bankruptcy, your assets will vest with the trustee. There are many exemptions. In a consumer proposal, your assets do not need to vest with the trustee. A first-time personal bankruptcy usually takes 9 months, remains on the credit report for 6 years after your discharge. Consumer proposals will go to a maximum of 5 years. You can pay them off early, remains on your credit report for 3 years after completion. On the bankruptcy side of things, you can only apply for new credit and rebuild in most situations after you've been discharged, whereas on the consumer proposal side of things, you can apply and start to rebuild credit during your consumer proposal. In a bankruptcy, there's a certainty of the process, but there isn't necessarily a certainty of that outcome because there are certain things that could affect your discharge. On the consumer proposal side, there's a certainty of process and a certainty of outcome. On the bankruptcy side of things, you may be required to make payments to your trustee for distribution to your creditors. On the consumer proposal side, you do agree to pay a fixed amount of money over a specific period of time to settle your debts. On the bankruptcy side, you're required to attend 2 mandatory financial counseling sessions, same with on the consumer proposal side. These are done virtually via video, which is just wonderful. You do need to track your income and expenses on the bankruptcy side of things. You need to ensure that all of your taxes are filed, and you're going to help the trustee obtain certain documentation. On the consumer proposal side of things, if 3 payments are missed, and there's a lot of grace with this right now with COVID. So as I say this is in normal situations when 3 payments are missed, the consumer proposal is annulled. However, right now, the Office of Superintendent of Bankruptcy has been wonderful at allowing consumer proposal, debtors to look at changing the terms of their proposal or, deferring a couple of payments, which is really wonderful. And then when all of the requirements are fulfilled, a certificate of compliance is issued. So that's a quick rundown of the consumer proposal versus bankruptcy. This is how you can contact us if that is, oh, sorry, we can move to the next slide. This is how you can contact us. We have a toll-free number all across Canada. Our debt relief specialist will treat everyone with grace and respect. That's one of our values, and will provide impartial, unbiased information. I know one of the myths out there is, don't call a bankruptcy trustee. They're going to put you into bankruptcy. Well, legally, we cannot. If you are not insolvent, we have got to refer you out to one of our referral partners. If you are insolvent, then we're going to look at which option is really best for you. Is it consumer proposal or is it bankruptcy? They'll prepare the file, set up a virtual meeting for you from the safety and comfort of your own home. And then once you are signed into whichever program it is, you've got that stay of proceedings, that legal protection, and you can start to rebuild your worth and, feel that sense of relief and hope, which, you will hear from our client stories. Next slide, please. Awesome. So thank you very much. If we have any questions, there's one more slide as well. I did want to share just all of the ways that you can connect with us and contact us. If we can kind of bring that up as well. One more over. There we go. So we are all over social media. We have a ton of really great blogs, some that are very specific to small business owners. So I encourage you to connect with us with any questions you have. I know we don't have too much time right now, but I definitely want to open it up to some Q&A at this point. Oh, that's a little bragging slide about us. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for running the slides for me today. So do we have any questions in the question box, or do we want to open it up for people to unmute themselves and ask questions?
Hi everyone, this is Jocelyn from the Burnaby Board of Trade. It looks like we do have a couple questions here, Taz. So I'll start off with, how do you overcome the taboo of this topic? Someone has a close friend who's struggling with talking about it. So that's a great question that I know a lot of people are probably wondering about. So Taz, please let us know.
Thank you for asking that question. And that, honestly, that is the mission that we are on with Bromwich and Smith. So you will see on all our social media that we are really working to normalize this conversation. And so how do you overcome the taboo of this topic? That's a big task. It takes changing the mindset and the conversation of an entire society. But we can start where we're at, right? So if you think about, again, pre-COVID, you're at a dinner get-together, or you're out for drinks with, the girls or the guys, we're really comfortable talking about things like, hey, just got a raise at work or bought our new home, all the positive financial things. We don't tend to talk about things like, hey, you know what? My spouse and I, we both work full-time, we're bringing home a 6-figure income, and at the end of the month, we're, in the red. Anybody else going through that? I mean, it would just be crickets, even if you did bring it up, right? But I think we can start small, whether it's just going, hey, I read this cool article or this cool blog. I mean, at any time, if you do look for statistics in Canada, we're sitting at between 48 and 51% of Canadians who will say that they're one paycheck away from not being able to cover their bills or are concerned about being able to pay their bills. So definitely we're not alone. And so I think we can start to have some of those kinds of conversations, just kind of pointing to research or a blog or an article that you read. I think, like the chamber is doing, the Board of Trade right now is taking a step towards that, just having this webinar and allowing us as a business community to talk about this. that's not necessarily normal. So, you know, kudos to the Board of Trade for setting this up today, because it starts to move us along that line of normalizing this conversation, helping us getting away from some of that stigma and taboo. I think those are really the only things I can think of at this point. We are like on a mission on this. So I really think, you know, on a one-to-one basis, we can all do our part. And then, you know, especially on the business side of things, the Board of Trade, the chambers, having these types of conversations. We offer, you know, if your small business wanted to do a webinar like this, that's a little bit more specific, you know, we can tailor them for your staff, and we can do just even a conversation on simple budgeting. I don't have the stats on me right now, but there are tons of stats about how financial worry affects, you know, employee engagement, productivity, and also stats on how likely employees would be willing to engage in learning more about the things that would help them on their financial side of things. So that's another thing that, you know, you can look to, you know, different financial literacy options that are out there and bringing them into your workplace and making it normal in your workplace. I know there are some thought leaders out there. There are some businesses. It used to be called Fiasco Gelato. It's now called Righteous Gelato, but they have team meetings, and they literally will sit down and work with their staff on a budget, and they have team meetings where they talk about these things. So I think as we start to normalize that, like it's very normal in your workplace to have webinars or sessions on diversity and inclusion or sexual harassment. So I think as we start to move into workplaces having even these conversations, not just on debt, but on various financial topics, I think that will help move us along that spectrum of, you know, going from taboo to just normal. I hope that answers your question, and feel free to reach out to me, you know, privately as well.
Thanks, Taz. And just another question here for someone that's perhaps, you know, this is their first time considering these options. How would you decide between bankruptcy and a consumer proposal? What are some kind of key points that would help you figure out which direction to go in?
Absolutely. Honestly speaking, yeah, there are a couple of things that you can kind of look at as check marks, but really you want to speak to an expert. The experts in society are your licensed insolvency trustees. So there are a lot of other people out there that sort of market and say that they can help you reduce your payments. And there are some very great legitimate companies out there, but just keep in mind, a consumer proposal can only be administered by a licensed insolvency trustee. So really, I would say if you're in a place where you're sort of like, I'm not sure, I'm not 100% sure I'm insolvent, but I'm struggling, you know, a call to us at least is totally complimentary. It's no obligation, but we're going to go through a certain amount of questions. You know, we're going to look at income, expenses, assets, liabilities, how many dependents there are. There's a little bit of a question. I would say it's, you know, maximum 20 minutes, and be able to determine, first of all, are you insolvent or are you not? And then we go through, okay, look, if we went the bankruptcy route, this is what your creditors would get. We need to offer better than that on the consumer proposal. So this is what we propose as a consumer proposal. Does this fit your budget? Is this realistic? Is this doable? And then we would go the consumer proposal route. But I would say if you kind of want to do a little bit of a DIY, that chart that I shared earlier, and I'm happy to share the whole presentation with the Board of Trade, you can share it with anybody. That chart will kind of help you do a little bit of an assessment of, okay, bankruptcy versus consumer proposal. What are some of the pros and cons? But really, truly, it isn't necessarily always your choice. It really comes down to the numbers and where you're at, and you know what the creditors are going to accept, and it's licensed insolvency trustees that are experts in figuring that out for you and with you.
Great, thank you so much, Taz. If there's no more questions, then I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of the Burnaby Board of Trade for taking on this presentation and sharing it with everyone today. I think there's some really good points there that we all learned something, and your contact information was on that last slide. I'll make sure that everyone receives those so they can reach out if they have further questions. But other than that, I just want to say thank you so much, and we really appreciate you spending the morning with us.